Today I am brewing the oldest beer in the world, ancient Sumerian beer from 4,000 years ago, or at least as close as I can get. So thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video as I make ancient Sumerian beer, this time on Tasting History. There's an old Sumerian proverb that says, "He who does not know beer does not know what is good." And to that, I say darn, because we don't know beer, or at least we don't know exactly what ancient Sumerian beer was like. It's one reason why I've taken so long to actually make this video, because the more I learned about beer in ancient Mesopotamia, the less I felt I knew about beer in ancient Mesopotamia. There are so many unknowns about just how it was made, what was in it, and really exactly what it was. It's enough to make you curl up in the fetal position in the corner. But with a ton of wonderful information sent to me from one of the top scholars in the field, Tate Paulette, and with the knowledge that no matter what I do, I'm not going to get it exactly the way that they did it, and this should really just be for fun, so stop taking it so seriously, I've decided to have a go at one version of ancient Sumerian beer. Now, the recipe that we're using is the 4,000-year-old hymn to Ninkasi, the Sumerian goddess of beer. And it's quite long, but I'm going to read just the most important parts. Ninkasi, your father is Enki, Lord Nidimud. Your mother is Ninti, the queen of the sacred lake. It is you who handles the dough and, with a big shovel, mixing in a pit the bapir with sweet aromatics, with date honey. It is you who bakes the bapir in the big oven, puts in order the piles of hulled grains. Ninkasi, it is you who water the malt set on the ground. The noble dogs guard it, even from the potentates. It is you who soaks the malt in a jar. The waves rise, the waves fall. It is you who spreads the cooked mash on large reed mats. Coolness overcomes. It is you who holds with both hands the great sweet wort, brewing it with honey and wine. The fermenting vat, which makes a pleasant sound, you place appropriately on a large collector vat. Ninkasi, it is you who pours out the filtered beer of the collector vat. It is like the onrush of the Tigris and Euphrates. Beautiful, but would we call that a recipe? No, I don't think so. First of all, it's missing a lot of words, and other words don't have great translations. And it's really not clear if the person who wrote it actually knew anything about the beer making process other than maybe he saw somebody make it once. So it's sort of like trying to recreate a birthday cake using the nursery rhyme patty cake as a recipe. I know that you roll it and pat it and you mark it with a B and then you put it in an oven for baby and me, but I feel like there are some crucial details missing. And it makes me grateful that today's sponsor, HelloFresh, does not write their recipes in poetic form. No, the recipes from HelloFresh are well written and very easy to follow because everything arrives to your door pre-portioned, so you can get past all of the prep work and get right to the cooking. And it's quick. Many of their recipes take less than 30 minutes to make, and you don't have to go to the grocery store to get ingredients. It's perfect for those busy weeknights, or for me, days where I've been in the kitchen all day making Sumerian beer. HelloFresh has lots of options too, from pescatarian and vegetarian to family-friendly for those picky eaters at home. And I've enjoyed pretty much every meal that I've got from them, but the one that I just made is most definitely my favorite. It was a Thai coconut curry chicken, and it was wonderfully creamy, and I got to choose the spice level, which is not at all. And I think it's going to be on pretty much every order that I put in from now on because I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And if you want to try this or any of the other wonderful meals from HelloFresh, go to HelloFresh.com and use my code TastingHistory21 to get 21 free meals plus free shipping. That's HelloFresh.com with my code TastingHistory21. And I promise, with HelloFresh, you will never have to rely on archaeology to know what you're supposed to put into a recipe, which is exactly what we kind of have to do with Sumerian beer. Scientists have studied residues on the inside of vessels to learn some of the ingredients used. And there are even more clues on receipts, delivery receipts, like one that calls for 18 liters of emmer wheat, 30 liters malted barley, 18 liters of bapir to make 45 liters of golden beer. And it makes you wonder, in 4,000 years, what kind of information will be gleaned from the great receipts of CVS. Now that account is to make something called golden beer, and that's another issue with recreating Sumerian beer. There were so many types. There are at least 9 types in writings from the Uruk period, and another set are mentioned a few centuries later. Golden beer, dark beer, sweet dark beer, red beer, strained beer. And a few centuries on after that, they stopped referring to them so much by how they look and more by their strength. Ordinary beer, good beer, and very good beer. Good meaning strong. And archaeologists believed that some of their beers had up to 5% alcohol by volume, whereas others had almost no alcohol. So with all that said, this is one version of Sumerian beer, and it's going to take you about a week to make. So on day 1, you take about a cup of barley and cover it with water and leave it to soak. Other grains like emmer wheat may have been used, but barley was most common. Now on day 2 is when things really start to ramp up because we have 2 ingredients, one of which we don't actually know what it was. It's called bapir, and it is some type of bread, but not likely anything like bread really that we know. Some translations say that it was probably a twice-baked, very hard bread, and I actually used that version when I did a Babylonian stew about a year ago. But the version for the beer is probably more like a sourdough, and that's probably how they introduced yeast into the beer. There may have been other yeasts used, but this yeast would work as long as you don't bake it so much that it kills all of the yeast, but really just kind of let it dry out in the summer sun. There's actually a similar dried yeast that has been used for thousands of years to make alcoholic beverages in Korea. So going with that theory, what you'll need is 1.5 cups or 210 grams of barley flour, 1.5 cups or 340 grams of sourdough starter, and about a half cup or 120 milliliters of water. Now if you don't have any sourdough starter, especially that has been made with barley flour, you can just use 3 cups of flour, 1 cup of water, and then about a tablespoon of yeast. Then mix everything together and give it a good kneading for about 5 minutes, then cover it and leave it to rise for a full day. Also on day 2, you are going to drain the barley that you'd soaked the night before and then put it into a cheesecloth. Then you need to suspend said cheesecloth somehow, and I kind of tied it onto a ring back here. You can also just kind of put it into a jar and then have something that is holding it in place, holding it up off of the bottom. You don't want it kind of pressed against anything. You also need it to stay fairly moist, so spritz it 2 or 3 times a day. And after 2 or 3 days, it'll actually begin to sprout, but we are not there yet. First, we must attend to our bapir. Because on day 3, you want to form it into a loaf or cakes, and then let it sit again. And really, you want it to dry out and get a nice crust on it. If you have a stove from 1947 that's always a little warm, it's actually perfect. I didn't need to bake mine at all, but if you don't have any of those things, then you can put it into the oven. You'll do that on day 4 at 300 degrees Fahrenheit or 150 Celsius for maybe 10 minutes. And I mean maybe 10 minutes. You really just want the outside to get a crust. You don't want the inside to get above about 110 degrees because then it will start to kill the yeast. But even if you don't use the oven to dry your bapir, you will need it to malt your barley. So on day 4, set the oven to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, about 93 degrees Celsius, and then set the barley out onto a baking sheet and set it in the oven for 2 to 3 hours. The grains should be nicely browned and start to have a wonderful nutty aroma. Then take the barley out of the oven and let them continue to dry. Now at this point, the Himtu says that you should have a dog to guard the barley, even from potentates. Alas, I have no dog, and Jamie did not seem interested in helping, so I took my chances. But luckily, no potentates came to steal my barley. Now the next day, day 5, this is where everything comes together. It's the big show, y'all. You take your barley and you crush it into a powder. I used a mortar and pestle, but if you want to save yourself the trouble, a food processor works just as well. Then pour some water onto the crushed grain and let it soak for a couple of hours. In the meantime, break up your bapir and let it sit to dry even more for those couple hours. Then add the bapir to a large jar and pour in the barley mash along with any aromatics you might use. These may have actually been part of the bapir, actually kind of baked and dried into it, not sure. Another thing we're not sure of is exactly what those aromatics were. They had access to all sorts of herbs and spices, juniper berry, cumin, fennel, pomegranates. But I'm using cardamom and coriander because I like those scents, and why not? Now they also often added date syrup, so I am adding 1/2 cup or 120 milliliters. This is going to add a lot of sugar, which should help in the production of alcohol. Even the god Enki used date syrup when making his beer. In kukuru containers, which make the beer good, he mixed beer mash. By adding date syrup to its taste, he made it strong. Clearly, it also helped to make it sweet, which seems to be the preferred way of drinking beer, especially if you were a deity. They drank sweet wine, they enjoyed sweet beer. When they had drunk sweet wine and enjoyed sweet beer, they started a quarrel concerning the arable fields. They began a debate in the dining hall. Perhaps the first argument fueled by too much wine and beer, but not the last. Now, if you are worried that the yeast in your bapir is not enough, or you've killed it, or whatever, if you're worried about yeast not working, you can add some yeast at this point. They would have possibly added things like fresh grains, or dates, or figs, or other things that would have natural yeast on them. Not sure. So if you're worried at all, go ahead and add about another teaspoon or two of yeast, because after doing all this work, it would be real bummer if you'd killed all your yeast. Because then when you add a gallon or 4 liters of water, you'll just end up with barley water instead of beer. But once the water is added, give it a good stir and then cover it with a cheesecloth and leave it somewhere out of the sun, out of the light, for 2 to 3 days to let Ninkasi work her magic. During which time you can make sure you're subscribed to Tasting History, and I can tell you a little bit more about ancient Mesopotamia's love affair with beer. Long before the people of Mesopotamia were drinking beer, it was the drink of their gods. In the Enuma Elish, or story of creation, before the fight against Tiamat, mother of dragons and releaser of monsters, those gods who backed Marduk as their champion conversed and sat down at the feast, ate grain of the field and drank of the vine, let sweet beer trickle through their straws. They felt good from drinking the beer. They became carefree, their spirits rose, and they ordained the destiny of Marduk, their champion. So not only did they set Marduk on the path of defeating Tiamat, and thereby creating the world as we know it, but they also dispelled the myth that ancient beers did not have enough alcohol to get you drunk. A lesson well learned by Enkidu, the wild man from the Epic of Gilgamesh, who had never drank beer until he met some shepherds. They placed food in front of him. They placed beer in front of him. Enkidu knew nothing of eating bread for food, and drinking beer he had not been taught. But they said, eat the bread, drink the beer, it's the civilized thing to do, it is our custom. And so he ate the bread, and he drank the beer, 7 jugs full, and he became expansive, and started to sing. His heart grew merry, his face lit up. The epic does not discuss the subsequent hangover, though there are myths that caution against drinking too much beer, like in the story of Inanna and Enki. Enki, who happened to be the father of Ninkasi, our beer goddess, was the Sumerian god of many things, including magic, craftsmanship, healing, virility, wisdom, trickery. That last one being something that one of his other daughters, Inanna, clearly inherited, because one night the two are sitting around boozing, having a few laughs. So it came about that Enki and Inanna were drinking beer together in the Absu. The bronze aga vessels were filled to the brim, and the two of them started a competition, drinking from the bronze vessels of Uruk. What happens next we don't exactly know, because there are a lot of lines missing, but it seems that the drinking competition did not go Enki's way, and he gets rather drunk, and Inanna talks him into giving her all of his powers, the mess, or gifts of civilization. All of them. I will give them to holy Inanna, my daughter. Holy Inanna received heroism, power, wickedness, righteousness, the plundering of cities, making lamentations, rejoicing. And it goes on for dozens and dozens of lines as he gives her more and more of these gifts of civilization. Everything from making fire, to music, to metalwork and leather working, to the state of movement and this state of just being sedentary. He gives her absolutely everything, and then she takes off, and Enki starts to sober up. As the effects of the beer cleared from Father Enki, who had drunk the beer, Enki spoke to Izimud, the minister. Izimud, my minister, my sweet name of heaven, where are the noble scepter, the staff and crook, the noble dress, shepherdship, kingship? My master has given them to his daughter. We've all done things that we regret when we've drunk too much, but that one takes the cake. So Enki sends his minister to his daughter to get everything back. It does not go well. So then he sends monsters to her, and she fends them off. And so he says, okay, you got them. And she shares those gifts with the city of Uruk. So, yay, civilization. Though I'm guessing she did not share the moral of the story that Enki just learned, which is not to drink too much beer, because the ancient Sumerians were big fans of beer. Beer, or kash in the Sumerian language, appears in some of the earliest known writings in Proto-Cuneiform, around 3000 BCE. It wasn't the tales of ancient great kings or the philosophy of the best minds of the time that they were writing down. No, it was receipts for beer. Who got beer, how much they got, and what kind of beer it was. Beer is also the focus of several laws in the Code of Hammurabi, specifically beer sold in taverns. If a tavern keeper should refuse to accept grain as payment for beer but accepts only silver, thereby reducing the value of beer in relation to the value of grain, they shall charge and convict that tavern keeper, and they shall cast her into the water. Seems fair to me. This grain is legal tender. You have to accept it. And it wasn't just grain that was used for payment, but the beer itself. Early records show it being given to workers as part of their daily wages. And this beer, while drunk at work, was probably on the weaker end of the alcoholic spectrum, but there were stronger beers that were drunk during social occasions. It was drunk at feasts, communally out of large pots through long reed straws, often to the point of drunkenness, so you bet it was strong. And I bet it was also strong beer that is depicted in some of the art at the time, and it's a rather erotic form of art. Now this art depicts beer being drunk probably in a tavern where prostitution was quite common. But beer was also drunk at home. In fact, it was even brewed at home. Part of a woman's dowry was often some of the best brewing vessels that they could provide. And some of these vessels are subjects of a 4,000-year-old drinking song. The Gakul vat, the Gakul vat, the Gakul vat, the Lamsare vat, the Gakul vat which makes the liver happy, the Lamsare vat which rejoices the heart, the Ugurbal vat, a fitting thing in the house, the Sagub jar which is filled with beer, the Am jar which carries the beer of the Lamsare vat. The beautiful vessels are ready on their pot stands. Well, now that's going to be stuck in my head all day. I really do wish, though, that I could hear what it actually sounded like, because I am going to guess that it is ever so slightly different than my performance. But that's okay. The song, anyway, goes on for a few more verses and finishes up with a true ode, a true dedication of this person's love of beer. As I spin around the lake of beer while feeling wonderful while drinking beer in a blissful mood, while drinking liquor and feeling exhilarated, with joy in the heart and a contented liver. My heart is a heart filled with joy. And I think I'm ready to fill my heart with joy and content my liver as I drink some Sumerian beer. So after a couple days, your brew should be ready to pour out. The thing is, we know that they often filtered their beer, but exactly how they did it, not quite sure. To what degree it was filtered, not quite sure. Some of the vats had a hole in the bottom. We've actually found, archaeologists have found strainers, though the holes are more like the size of a colander. It's really unclear. I'm going to filter it through just a regular strainer to get out the big chunks, but it's still going to be somewhat cloudy. And here we are, ancient Sumerian beer, 4,000 years in the making. So I can see why they used a straw, because there are some particulates on the top, there are some particulates on the bottom, definitely more on the bottom, so a straw is going to help you get to the good stuff. Here we go. It's interesting. The reason I kind of held it was because there were some bubbles. It's not carbonated, but it's ever so slightly effervescent. It's actually not bad. There's definitely a nuttiness. I'm getting like a little bit of the cardamom. I'm getting some of those aromatics. What I'm not getting a lot of is the date syrup. I wouldn't say this is sweet. I think that they probably added date syrup more afterward just to flavor it. Or there was just a lot more in there. I don't know, because it's not that sweet. There's like a hint of sweetness, but it's not that sweet. It's also not sour. I was worried it would be sour. I know a lot of people who have made it and they said it is very sour. It's no more sour than a modern like Hefeweizen is sour, which I think is a little sour, but it's not like unpleasantly sour. What you're getting though is this nuttiness. It's like the nuttiness that you get in a brown ale, but much, much lighter. I mean, you can tell there is alcohol in this, but it's not overwhelming at all. I mean, let's try some more. Yeah, there's a little yeastiness, so maybe it could even use a little bit longer fermenting, but I think it's pretty much there, and we don't know when they would have stopped it, honestly. Yeah, that's kind of fun. I don't mind that. The thing is, it doesn't last very long. 2 days, maybe 3, but I'd say 2 days, and you really kind of gotta chuck it. So drink up and hopefully, you know, use some caution and don't give away the keys to civilization or whatever Enki did. You know, drink responsibly. So I'm going to put a link to a playlist down here of more Babylonian recipes and recipes kind of from that part of the world. Make sure to subscribe to Tasting History. Have a wonderful new year, and I will see you next time on Tasting History. I'm actually going to drink more of this. Not the whole thing, that's ridiculous, but more.